Hello, and welcome to this edition of Washington Notebook, featuring Congressman Dave Camp. For the latest inside information from our nation's capital, Washington Notebook talks today with special guest Dave Camp.
Hello, and welcome to Washington Notebook. I'm Congressman Dave Camp, and today I'll be speaking with the Executive Director of the Congressional Coalition on Adoption Institute, or CCAI, Kathleen Strottman. The CCAI is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to raising awareness about the millions of children around the world in need of permanent, safe, and loving homes. And as a former board member of CCAI and president, I know full well the good work this organization does. But today, Mrs. Strottman and I will discuss the CCAI's goals to educate policymakers on issues related to adoption and foster care in an effort to remove policy barriers that hinder children from finding families. So Kathleen, thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm glad to be here, thank you.
Why don't you just tell us a little bit about CCAI?
Sure. We're an organization, as you said, that is really dedicated to making sure that every child in the world realizes their basic human right to a family. And what people don't realize sometimes is that one of those barriers can be the law. And an example I like to give is up until 1975, the law actually prohibited foster parents from becoming adoptive parents. And when Congress realized that, because of organizations like CCAI, they were able to craft laws that, in fact, not only didn't prevent foster families from adopting, but encouraged foster families from adopting. And now 70% of the kids who find homes out of foster care find them in foster families.
So how does CCAI help the Congress deal with issues of foster care and adoption?
Well, one of the things that we find is, education is a very important tool, and we know that on other issues, but unfortunately there doesn't always appear to be organizations like CCAI that are able to give the information that members need in order to use the power that they have on behalf of these kids. And so we'll do a series of different types of events, bringing people with real experience, either foster families, adoptive families, youth who've been adopted, right to the doors of Congress and allow them to interact with members of Congress, and together they come up with solutions.
Now, Michigan alone has more than 14,000 children in foster care, and I know there are thousands of children around the country. Mm-hmm. How does CCAI help identify children in need of adoption in foster care and in other circumstances? Sure.
Well, one of the things that we really try to do is to make sure that the people who have actual real experience, that opportunity to say, this is what I experienced either as a foster youth or as an adoptive parent, that they have an opportunity to bring that experience. And we find that when they do that, when they're able to sit with a member of Congress, it's life-altering for both. One, because the member of Congress gets to hear the day-ins and day-outs of the actual issue, but for the person who's getting to be the advocate, it's an opportunity to use their experience to promote change. And I'll give you an example. One of the things we're very proud of is our foster youth internship program. And through that program, 15 young people come up in the summer and they are able to intern with a member of Congress. And at the end of their summer, after learning all the ins and outs of Washington, they put forward some recommendations to members of Congress. If they were now in Congress, what would they do to fix the very system that raised them? And I'm so proud to report that those actual recommendations have become law. And I think that shows the power of the programs we're trying to do.
That foster internship program is really an exciting program. I've participated in that with my office, and also gone to the sort of celebration at the end of the time when the foster students tell their stories.
Yep.
And it's incredible the impact this has had, because many of them think that this is an opportunity that would never have been open to them.
That's right.
So it not only opens their eyes, but as you point out, they become incredible advocates for
it changes their lives. I really do think it makes them believe that there is something that can be done, not only to affect change from the past, but for them to be a part of the change in the future. It's really exciting.
The good news is we've seen the number of children in foster care declining over time, and that states like Michigan and others are increasing the number of adoptions they have. What do you attribute that to particularly?
Well, a lot of it is awareness. I mean, one of the things that we find day in and day out is that we meet people on the streets who say, I had no idea that these kids were out there. I had no idea that they were looking for homes. 108,000 children are available today. All you'd have to do is connect with one of these children and take them in and make them your own. And they're all wanting that opportunity more than I could ever describe here for you. And I think some of it is correcting some of the public misperceptions. And one of those that I'd like to share today is that we're ever too old to need a family. A lot of the kids that are coming into foster care are older than 9 years old, and there's this misperception that somehow magically at 18, we walk off and we don't need anybody in our lives anymore, and I'm sure both of us would say that's not the case at all. And so it's letting people in the community know that there are 12 and 14-year-olds who are out there looking for that mom or dad who can, be there for their basketball games, who can be there when they graduate from high school, who can be there at their wedding and be their grandparent one day. So those are the types of things we try to do.
And finding a safe and loving home for an older child or any child is really a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
How best can CCAI help make sure that kids in need of homes, even those older kids you mentioned, find the right family?
Well, and a lot of it is empowering the states, as you very well know from your experience before coming to Congress, is that a lot of the decision making is done at the state level, and the federal government has been a really important partner, I think, in giving the tools to the states to make sure that when they're recruiting foster parents and they're recruiting adoptive parents, they're putting in place the right screens. But more importantly, one of the things we're learning lately is the right supports after an adoption takes place, to be there, to still be the system that many of these families came to know when they were foster parents, that if they need a social worker who can help with a crisis that they might be having with their child who's been adopted, if they need help, so many families come forward, and it's amazing to see them adopt 5-6 children at one time, and that's a tremendous burden on their pocketbooks. And so being that partner, saying, you're making the loving commitment to this child, and we're here with you every step of the way. And that's the type of things that we want to make sure that states have at their disposal.
I think it's so important for families to know they're not on their own,
That's
and that
right.
there are resources there to help them. And moving from foster parent to adoptive parent isn't necessarily as big a change maybe as some might see.
That's right.
In 2008, Congress passed legislation for relatives of children in need of adoption have an opportunity to attempt to become adoptive parents. Can you speak to that legislation?
Sure. No, and it's a perfect example of the type of work that we try to do at CCAI. For a long time, people were confused about what happened when particularly someone who was related to the child who was in foster care wanted to step forward and make a permanent commitment to that child. And as a lawyer, I know one of the things that is different between a guardianship and an adoption is that there is a need to terminate the parental rights in order to do an adoption. And you can understand that if you're trying to parent your grandchild or your cousin, it's hard to step forward and say, I want to terminate all of the rights of my daughter or my son in order to adopt. And so what we found is that this was a barrier. This was making it so people weren't stepping up and being that lifelong commitment for that child. And we said that doesn't make any sense, and we should change that. And states started to do that actually because of a program that the federal government created, a waiver program which said to states, when you can find a really good idea and you can do something good about it, go ahead and do it. Don't worry about some of the the larger bureaucratic rules that are in place, and do a good thing on behalf of a child. And states were finding that this was working, and so the federal government said, we're great to see that you're placing more and more kids in this type of circumstance. It's working for the young people. They're having really good outcomes. And so in 2008 they said, we're going to be a partner and we're going to fund that in the same way that we do adoption. So it's a perfect example of how the law and what's good for kids comes together.
And what about a family who may be watching who's thinking about adopting a child, and they may not be foster parents? What is the first place they should go to, or where should they turn?
Well, another great thing that the federal government did is actually the photo listings that exist in most states, and there's actually one called Adopt US Kids, and I think it's a great resource for you to just get to know in the privacy of your own home. You can go on the website and you can find out the different profiles of the individual children that are available, and I think it's a great way to get started. There's also resources resources and examples of other families that have found adoption through going through the website. Another thing to do, believe it or not, is to speak to people in your community who have gone forward and they have fostered or adopted. There's a lot of support networks, and get their experience, because then you kind of go into it with your eyes wide open, and that's something that I would recommend.
I know in a lot of communities in Michigan, the probate court is the court, really the child court in our state, and often that would be a good place to turn.
That's
I think particularly as well as some of these national websites. I think they're so important.
That's right.
November 19th was National Adoption
Yes.
Day, and November is National Adoption Month.
Yes.
How else, and Congress passed a resolution, I supported it obviously, and how else can we raise awareness
Sure.
of the need for adoption and foster care?
Well, one of the things that CCAI does, another program that we celebrate, is our Angels in Adoption program. And that and National Adoption Day are both efforts to get into the communities and to inspire others to say, you don't actually have to be a superhero to do this. You actually just have to care about a child. And so what we do through the Angels in Adoption program is we ask members of Congress like yourself to look into their districts once a year and to find someone that they think is an extraordinary example of someone who took that first step and made a difference in the life of just one child. Doesn't have to be a whole group of children, although some of them are. And I know that your family was the Gombers.
Yes, Don and Joe from Freeland, Michigan.
Tell us about them.
Well, just an incredible family. I had an opportunity to meet them, of course, personally when they came out for Angels in Adoption, and just their commitment, and what great people. And it is an opportunity to highlight people, and over the years I've nominated other families as well who have really taken that step and done so much to make the life, and in some cases many foster children and adoptive children, make their lives better and really bring them the kind of family that all kids want and need.
And that's what I actually love about the program. Soon after I got to CCAI, I got a call from a family actually in Iowa, and it was a woman actually in Iowa, and she said to me, I just wanted to let you know that I decided to become a foster parent, and I'm now adopting my foster child because of your Angels program. And she said, you know what it was? I opened up the paper and I read about this woman, and I think I might have even gone to high school with her. And she said she had stepped forward, she had fostered some children, she had adopted them, and I thought to myself, the only difference between myself and her is that she stepped forward and did something, and I'm sitting here reading about her in the paper. And it really, I think, makes people understand that you don't have to be a superhero. You just have to want to make a difference, and the rest is kind of simple.
Let's talk a little bit about the Adoption and Safe Families Act. I know you worked on that legislation when you worked in the Senate for Senator Mary Landrieu, who's been active in adoption issues her entire time in the Senate. That was really an attempt to kind of break through some of the bureaucracy. As you mentioned, states can get some waivers, but how do you think that legislation has helped?
It's helped a lot. I think one of the things that it did most importantly was to really set out the expectation that every child deserves a family. Before that, I think we had it wrong. We're thinking about it as the parents had a right to parent, and that's true, I think. But I think we have to remember that at some point when they're not able to do that, that the child's need to have a family is very important, and we need to protect it. One of the things that happened soon after Congress passed that is that states started to think about things differently. They started to think about their role in these kids' lives differently. And it's really exciting to report that at the time, the adoptions out of foster care was just about 26,000. And now we're at around 58,000, and that was just because we changed our way of thinking about it. And I would suggest that we have a little bit more to go, because while we're so excited, and that means that we're placing about half of the kids that are in need of families, as I suggested with older kids, we have to really challenge ourselves again to say we need it to be 100%. We need 100% of the kids that are looking for families to find families, and that's completely possible if you think about it. 100,000 kids in the communities that we know that are in Michigan. There's at least 300 churches in almost in every state. If just one person would step forward for each of these kids, we would have no kids waiting.
And for someone who might think they don't have the financial resources to take this step, do you have any thoughts for them as well?
Well, one thing I definitely want to mention, since you've been way too modest about your own role in this, is that one of the things the federal government did was the adoption tax credit. And we've heard from so many families, and what that means is that if you adopt a child out of foster care, or actually from anywhere in the world, you're eligible for relief on your taxes. And most recently, actually, that was made refundable. And every day I get stopped by a family that says that's what made the difference for them. And I think it's a wonderful example of how the federal government's able to say, you know, you're doing your part to help us as a society. You're taking in a child who would otherwise be very expensive for us to raise in foster care. And so we'll just give you a little bit of help on your taxes. And I mean, I think there are resources out there. There are also organizations that'll help provide grants. So don't make costs the reason you don't step forward.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for the hard work that you do. I want to thank Kathleen Strottman, Executive Director of the Congressional Coalition of Adoption Institute, for joining me today, and thank you for this edition of Washington Notebook.
To contact Congressman Camp's office, check out the addresses on your screen or call 1-800-342-2455.